Mindfulness teacher training these days is more about learning a particular curriculum in a group format rather than focusing on the teacher. Hi, my name is Ted Meissner and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. Today we're going to be talking about how doing one-to-one teaching can be a big benefit, not just for the person being mentored, but for those of us who are mindfulness professionals. Come on, let's get started. Our guest today is Ed Halliwell. Ed, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ted. Thanks for having me.
I am so eager for this conversation because you and I, as you mentioned before we started recording, keep running into each other because we're in so many of the same spaces. And just being able to catch up with you is a great delight that I've been looking forward to. But before we get started with today's topic around mentoring, maybe you could say just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a mindfulness teacher, and that's been my job, if you like, for the last 15 years or so. Um, and so I teach mindfulness in groups. I teach mindfulness one-to-one, which is kind of what we're here to kind of focus on today. In the past, I've also taught in workplaces. I'm a supervisor, so I feel like I'm a kind of a bit of a jack of all trades mindfulness teacher. Yeah, based
Yeah,
in the UK.
great. And let's dive into that topic a little bit by starting to ask what was it that got you interested in mentoring supervision, this territory around leading to one mindfulness? Tell us how this got started.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it started really by accident, in that, like most mindfulness teachers, I was trained to teach groups. So um, kind of with programs such as MBSR, MBCT, um, and a lot of my experience also in my own training in meditation had taken place in group settings. Whether that was on retreats or going to meditation programs would often be in a group setting. So it seemed to be kind of naturally flowing that's what I would do. So that's kind of how I started to teach, whether it was in workplaces, whether it was in general public groups. What I found is that sometimes someone would come to me at the end of, let's say, an 8-week program, or maybe someone who I would be seeing as part of my graduate groups, because I also run graduate groups for people who've taken foundational courses in mindfulness. And sometimes those people will come to me and say, "Hey, could I see you for a kind of a one-off session or a one-to-one session? I've got something particular that I'd rather not bring into the group, or I feel like I could really benefit from some individual time and space um, to develop my practice." Um, and so um, initially, I was a little bit kind of reticent about doing this because it felt like it's something that went outside of what I trained to do. On the other hand, I'd had a very good experiences sometimes myself with such conversations. Whether that was in the past in working in therapy where we might see somebody one to one, or maybe on a meditation retreat when you might have a one-to-one conversation with the teacher as part of the retreat, or having a meditation mentor, where might check in every so often with them to kind of talk about your practice. So it did in some sense fit in with that model, and as we began to say yes to these requests, I found that it could be really, really helpful for people. And so that's kind of how it began to happen. And so as these seemed to be helpful to people, I started to talk about it a little bit more and, kind of offer it as something um, that I would do. And then I would say that over time, particularly perhaps when things more often moved online, which meant that people could contact me from all over the world rather than just from where I'm based in Sussex, that more people would come with these kinds of requests. And so it's something that has grown organically over time, to become a much kind of kind of a part of the mindfulness offering that I do. So I still teach groups, and I still run graduate groups and graduate courses and so on. But actually now a large part of what I find myself working with is working with individuals in a one-to-one setting.
Yeah. One of the things that, as you were describing this, struck me is that people came to you to ask about this. And what that shows is there were different needs that were appearing that a group setting wasn't quite answering. And that this is one of the important things for mindfulness professionals, teachers, to really pay attention to what is being called for. What are people's needs around this? And it can be very different for someone to come and say, I need something specialized. And it's not this structure of a course that we already know and are trained on very well. And we know what to do in week 3 and we know what to do in week 4. How do you navigate the unique circumstances of what shows up with each person coming in? Because there's variety there. What's that like for
Yeah.
you as the mentor?
Yeah, well, first of all, if I may, I'd like to acknowledge what you've just said there, which is the recognition that if you like, a standard curriculum inevitably cannot meet every need. Um, and this isn't necessarily, kind of a fault. It is just an inevitability that when you're working with a set curriculum, with a kind of like, well, now you teach this and now you lead this practice, that um, cannot be tailored to each individual at that group or in that group in the moment that they are in. Because people come from all sorts of different situations. They're in all sorts of different moods. They have all sorts of different needs. They may be coming for different reasons why they want to learn mindfulness. Um, Not only that, some people find groups really difficult. So some people maybe actually a group. Yeah, well, I put my hand up to that too. So Um, some people find that actually they're quite uncomfortable in a group, or a group might trigger their anxiety. Um, and so there are all sorts of kind of conditions where a group training might not be optimal. And yet, as mindfulness teachers, perhaps in the tradition of MBSR, MBCT, there's been an overwhelming focus on um, teaching in a group. So yeah, absolutely. As you say, this was something that I found, I hadn't really considered until people started coming to me. Um, so of course now I've forgotten the question you actually asked me, Ted. So would you be willing to repeat it, that I can actually answer that question?
That's perfectly fine because this is an important aspect to it. As you had mentioned earlier, I think before we started recording, there's this idea of one size fits all, and we know that's not so. It's to honor a phrase that I got from an old college friend, Pat Schifferdecker, one size fits one. And while
Yeah,
there's so much we can get out of a program, it's not knocking programs that have a set curriculum. Those are fine. Those are good. Those help most people coming to them and observing the unique needs of, thinking about going to a buffet line at a restaurant. We don't all pick out the exact same things. We
yeah,
have different needs around all of that.
yeah,
So
absolutely. And
yeah, go
and
on,
I and I've
please.
remembered and I've remembered your question now, which is kind of how might we hold those unique needs? How can we meet that unique need when we don't have that sense of, this is what I'm supposed to do next? Well, I would suggest that our mindfulness training is just what we need in that moment. So, well, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is tending to experience as it arises and responding appropriately, right? Or at least that's one definition. Feel free to choose your own definition, but something like that. So when we are in a room with an individual with their unique experience, and maybe they're describing it to us, or maybe we're observing how they are, isn't the invitation to hold them in our awareness and find an appropriate response to that moment. Now, there are all sorts of um, practices and approaches and learnings and kind of parts from programs that we might bring into that situation. So, I mean, I draw from a whole range of different um, programs and trainings and approaches that I've found helpful over the years, and it's range from MBSR, MBCT, the deepening mindfulness course, mindfulness-based compassionate living, acceptance and commitment training, the Buddha Dharma, and kind of all that rich kind of heritage of recognizing impermanence and kind of what's the nature of being and selfing. All of this can be brought into a one-to-one session, depending on the needs of the moment and depending on the needs of the person. If we can tune in to that person and what's going on for them and draw from our own experience so that we can meet them, so that we can, by embodying mindfulness ourselves, find a way to help them in their journey, whatever that. I mean, people may have different intentions, they may have different needs. Certainly, they come with, unique, kind of uniqueness. I was going to say presentation, but that sounds rather clinical, their uniqueness. But if we can drop into our own mindfulness, then actually mindfulness itself, I've found over time, through experience, that it seems to be a congruent approach to bring to that one-to-one context.
And I completely agree with everything you're saying. And especially in this territory of exercising our own curiosities as a teacher, that we have certain expectations and we have an idea of the kinds of things that will show up in a particular course at a point during a full program and curriculum. We have that understanding, and that can get a little dusty, and we might
Mm,
feel a little boxed in with that. And with these one-to-one engagements where it's the unique needs of the individual, their personal histories, their cultural background, the encounters that they're having in their daily life, that's something different each and every time. And I get to
yeah.
be more curious what I have found. And I'm curious for you, what are some of the things that you've really liked best about doing one-to-one mentoring?
Mm. Well, sometimes when I have been in groups and have the sense of the kind of like the needs of the curriculum or the needs of the group, I've sometimes, um, for example, been in an inquiry with a participant and they've said something that I would love to explore with them and would love to go more deeply into with them. And yet something is telling me that in that context might not be helpful or appropriate. Maybe because it wouldn't be helpful for the group to hear it. Maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable speaking about it in the group. Maybe it would take up too much time. Maybe it would take us kind of further away from the themes of the session that will be beneficial for the needs of that particular course. So it's not like that's necessarily kind of the wrong thing to do, but a sense of discomfort at perhaps not being able to explore in a way that for that individual, my sense it could be helpful for them. So that's what can happen in a one-to-one session, is that those conversations can occur. Those experiments can be kind of played with. I love the flexibility and the creativity and a sense of possibility that can come with working with someone one to one. I sometimes use the kind of metaphor is like if you learn to play the piano, let's say, that learning to teach an 8-week mindfulness course, for example, is a bit like, kind of learning your scales. That's really important. And particularly as a new teacher, kind of it wouldn't be so helpful to try to go off and kind of play something other than the sheet music in front of you. Whereas a one-to-one approach is perhaps kind of opening to the possibility of playing jazz, of actually really responding to the feel of the moment. Now, of course, this is happening, and we hopefully is happening in an 8-week course, for example, in inquiry. And I'm not suggesting that an 8-week course with all of its aspects are, kind of like you're stuck to a particular scale, because of course there's this sense of responding to the needs of the moment in the group. But in a one-to-one session, that can happen perhaps much more fluidly, with more flexibility, with more space to allow something creative to happen through this kind of sense of playing jazz.
And I've used that metaphor before as well, with the idea of now you're improvising, you're doing something different. And that itself, it actually leads to the next question around for those teachers who may not have been doing mentoring, there may be some concerns about playing jazz. Because we're very
Yeah,
comfortable playing the piece we've really got down and we know very well. And even with a breadth of experiences and traditions and courses to draw from, it can still be a little nerve wracking to do a mentoring session with the not knowing of what's going to come up. What are some things you might recommend to those who might be considering starting mentoring as a new thing that they offer to deal with that randomness, that unknown quality that may occur?
yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say that it is completely okay not to do this. And indeed, part of my reluctance to engage in one-to-one work when I was a new teacher was based very much on that sense of I'm not sure that I would know how to do this. So through repeated practicing of those curricula that we're trained in, through perhaps the experience of kind of encountering many of the things that can come up in a group that can then be held within the group container and through the support of supervision, um, there then may come a time where we start to feel comfortable enough to play jazz, to be able to improvise, to be able to meet somebody one to one. So I think there is a wisdom in the asking ourselves, am I ready for this? And I would say that I wasn't ready for it at the beginning of my teaching, in to kind of have that sense of letting go of the curricula. However, if you have a sense that you might be ready and you're a an experienced mindfulness practitioner. So I've been practicing mindfulness about 25 years now, since I started meditating, and I've been teaching for 15 years. Um, Maybe there comes a time where you can trust mindfulness, that you can trust the um, amazing kind of capacity of this quality of paying attention and all of the principles that are behind it that come from thousands of years of practice and investigation and observation and insight. Would that be enough? Can we trust that that actually could be enough to help people, particularly if the teacher or whatever you want to call yourself, the mentor, has embodied this sufficiently in their own being to be able to draw from it spontaneously, not perfectly, of course. I'm not suggesting perfectly, but to actually have that within them enough so that they can meet someone in that way without the props necessarily of the curriculum. Maybe that might be worth playing with and trying it out. Now, again, I would, we've got great safeguarding here available in our mindfulness community, supervision. So, I mean, it was very helpful for me that I had a supervisor who also works with people one-to-one in various contexts. So I could check things out with them. Am I on course here? Am I going way off base here? Because I certainly had those senses of like, is this what I should be doing here? Hey, I'm starting to, go off the rules here. It's kind of like as somebody who has a bit of a tendency to be quite rule bound, that was quite scary sometimes for me. But what I observed was actually how powerful it could be for people. So seeing changes that occurred over time with someone um, that I'm not sure could have happened in the context of an 8-week course, partly because enables, kind of the time constraints to be more flexible. So you might work with someone very briefly, or you might work with someone for a long time. There are a number of people that I've been working with now for a number of years and seeing the changes in their life and in their mindfulness practice and in their capacity to make flexible choices um, that maybe isn't possible in a kind of a short period of time or in a group. So I've seen that happen on many occasions, and that's been very heartening to see the possibilities of how things can change for people over time through this process um, of mindful mentoring. And one more thing, if I may, just to say about this, you said, kind of like how can we trust it? Well, remembering that all we're doing, or at least all I'm doing, because of course there isn't not very many trainings on this, so I better just speak for myself. What I'm doing is just sharing mindfulness and practicing inquiry. So I'm using the same skills actually. Same skills that I would bring to a group, but I'm practicing those skills with one person, meeting them exactly where they are as best I can, and hearing them um, and responding to kind of the feel of what's happening and noticing what's going on in my thoughts and inquiring into what's going on in theirs. And it's an inquiry, and then I mean, one of the lovely things also about mindfulness mentoring is that we can record practices that are tailored to what they need for them. So quite often I will record a practice that's really guided, towards exactly what we've been talking about and what I sense they might benefit from and what they've told me they might benefit from. So all that's happening is that we're um, tailoring something that's already complete, already has a wholeness to it, and bringing it into this context. So maybe that's worth having some confidence in.
And especially your confidence as a fellow human being with the reflection of what is called for in this moment. What are the kinds of things that have been helpful to me over time and others that I've
Yeah.
worked with? What have I seen? All of that can come into the mentoring relationship to support the person who's come to you for help, for growing, for whatever it happens to be based on those unique needs. So,
Yeah, very
one
much.
final question for you, Ed. What is maybe one thing, if you can, if you can keep it to one thing that you haven't talked about yet that you'd like to?
Hmm. So I suppose I would like to talk about possibility of mentoring becoming a um the word valid isn't quite right. Coming and maybe established isn't quite right. But for the conversations to happen where this could come to be a part of the suite of possibilities that the mindfulness world, if you like, the world of mindfulness teachers, of training organizations, um, where this can be on the table, because as I say, it almost has kind of happened to become a major part of my work through accident. And so much of the research is based on groups. So much of the teacher training is based on working with groups. So much of the focus, many people who've, taken mindfulness courses, so many of them will have happened in groups. And it seems to me a little um, odd that particularly perhaps in an age where I know many mindfulness teachers find it difficult to fill groups, and so could this be a way that um, mindfulness can be transmitted as we move forward in a viable way? Yeah, that's my word. Thank you. It's viable was the word I was looking for. A viable way. And I would love it if there were people who were willing to, research this. I would love it if people were to look at how it might be trained. And I really hear what you're saying, Ted, about, drawing from your own experience. I think in some sense, it has to come from our own experience because that's what we're bringing in the room with someone. But there are, potentially skillful ways where people can be helped to learn um, how to engage in this way. That would be wonderful. So I'd love it to become part of the kind of the conversation around how the mindfulness field moves forward.
Completely agree. And I would even add into this and have made this encouragement to those who are really holding and driving the supervision mentoring thread of what we do is that it's not just supervision for mindfulness, is that the capacities that we have as mentors, as supervisors, apply to other things, to other kinds
Mm.
of supervision that's not just a clinical or corporate kind, but how do what we work with, how does that help in those contexts as well?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. For those who have tuned in, I will have a couple of links to you, including an article that Ed has written about one-on-one mentoring and link to his website. Our guest today, Ed Halliwell. Ed, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ted.
Thanks so much for watching. Ed, thank you so much for your time today. And as a reminder for those who are here, if you would please tap that subscribe button because it does help others to find this podcast. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you again soon on Mindfulness Voyage.